There is a show that aired on Cartoon Network that was technically for children, in the same way that a gravestone is technically a rock. It had a boy in a white hat, and a magical dog and candy kingdoms, and princess rescues, and the whole bright, colorful apparatus of a cartoon that was supposed to be simple. And underneath all of that, running through the bones of the thing, was something that fans have been digging into for over 15 years now. Theories, dozens of them, some confirmed, some demolished, some still sitting in the middle of the road between fact and speculation, waiting for someone to decide what they are. Tonight, we are going through all of them, the ones everyone knows, and the ones only the deepest part of the fandom ever touched. We are going from the surface, the obvious ones the show eventually confirmed out loud, down through the layers, past the iceberg, into the theories that change how you see every single scene in the show, if you let them. So get comfortable. This is going to take a while, and none of it is urgent. Drop a comment right now. Tell me where you are and what time it is when you're watching this. I love knowing middle of the night in Ohio. 2 in the afternoon on a Sunday in Manila, sitting on your lunch break in London with one earbud in. Wherever you are, say so. It genuinely makes this feel less like talking to a screen and more like sitting in a room with people who care about the same things. Let's start with the one that started everything. The theory that wasn't really a theory at all, because the show eventually confirmed it completely. But for the first season and a half, it was the most exciting piece of detective work the fandom had going. The land of Oo is our Earth. Specifically, it is our Earth somewhere between 1,000 and 1,100 years after a catastrophic event that ended human civilization, remade the biosphere of the planet, and left just enough wreckage in the background of every outdoor scene that if you paused at the right frames, you could see it. Highway signs, military vehicles half swallowed by grass, collapsed overpasses wrapped in vines, the architectural bones of a civilization that used to look a lot like ours, visible through the candy colored overgrowth if you knew what you were looking at. The evidence piled up fast, even in the early episodes, before the show confirmed anything directly. In the episode Business Time, which aired as the 8th episode of the first season, Finn and Jake melt icebergs to find scrap material, and out of one of those icebergs come 4 frozen businessmen, corporate professionals in suits with briefcases and a very specific, very modern kind of body language. They talked about efficiency. They had opinions about workflow optimization. They were recognizably human in a way that nothing else in the land of Oo had been up to that point, and they were frozen inside an iceberg in a magical world that had clearly been something entirely different once. The show ran with it from that moment forward. Pendleton Ward confirmed in interviews that the world of Oo was meant to be a post apocalyptic Earth from that episode onward. The ruins began appearing in the background with more frequency and more specificity. The Adventure Time wiki documented them episode by episode. Broken fighter planes visible behind scenes that had nothing to do with the old world, license plates and traffic cones, and the remnants of subway infrastructure present in the backgrounds of outdoor scenes. Not as set dressing, as evidence, the bones of something familiar, slowly being swallowed by something new. The coin evidence is the piece the fandom found most compelling. In the episode King of Mars, a penny appears on screen, and the visible year places the end of the old world within the 21st century, which means O is not a distant alternate history or a far off parallel dimension. It is this world. It is what follows this world if the thing the show calls the Mushroom War actually happened, and the geography supports it in ways that are eerie once you look closely. When you see a full view of the globe as depicted in the show, there is a piece missing from the Earth. Not metaphorically, literally. A crater left by the detonation of the mutagenic bomb that ended the Mushroom War, still present as a physical absence in the landmass of the planet 1,000 years later. The Adventure Time. Wiki and multiple fan researchers have noted that the remaining continents, from aerial views seen in episodes like The Lich, match a scarred and reshaped version of Earth's real geography once you account for the missing mass. The land of U sits near the crater, built on the edge of the wound. The land grew over its worst day. That is not metaphor either. It is visible from orbit in the show's own animation. The show confirmed this. It is not speculation anymore. Simon Petrikov's VHS tapes are recorded in a room that looks like any room from our present, in clothes that could have come from any thrift store in any Western city. He mentions Scandinavia. He is recognizably ours. And the show left that recognition sitting there, fully exposed, in one of the most devastating scenes it ever produced. But the confirmation of the big theory only opened the door to the smaller ones, and those are where it gets genuinely interesting. The first theory that grew directly from the Mushroom War confirmation is the Cold War escalation reading, and it deserves careful examination, even though it was never officially confirmed, because the evidence for it runs deeper than most casual viewers ever noticed. The show places the disaster firmly in something recognizable as our recent past. The technology in Simon's tapes, the fashions, the cultural references, the specific aesthetic of the ruins visible in outdoor scenes, all of it positions the end of the world somewhere between the 1980s and the 2010s. The mushroom bombs are nuclear in character, whatever else they were. The name Mushroom War is a reference to the shape of a nuclear detonation. The ruined infrastructure follows the patterns of a first world nation struck by massive explosive force. The building styles in collapsed structures, visible in background shots throughout the series, follow the proportions and aesthetics of contemporary construction rather than anything further in the past. The theory: the Mushroom War was a version of the Cold War that did not stop. The slow, grinding ideological conflict between nuclear armed superpowers, which in our history stepped back from the edge at its most dangerous moments, in the world of Adventure Time, kept accelerating past every point where rational actors would have found a reason to pause. Arms proliferation that escalated past every limit. And then the bombs fell, not just nuclear weapons in the conventional sense, but the mutagenic weapon, a specific bomb that the show depicts as doing something conventional nuclear weapons cannot. It transformed the things it touched. It rewrote the biology of the world. It introduced into living organisms something that changed what they could be, and the candy people and slime creatures and elementals and rainicorns of Oo are, in some meaningful biological sense, the world that grew from that transformation. Pendleton Ward confirmed in an interview that magic had been in decline throughout human history, retreating as rationalism and technology advanced. The bomb brought it back. This maps onto the Cold War reading almost precisely. A hyper rational, hyper technological civilization that pushed its tools past the breaking point and unleashed something it couldn't anticipate or contain. The process that created the Cold War's most dangerous dynamic, the logic of mutually assured destruction, the arms race that made safety contingent on the capacity for total annihilation, was the same process that had been suppressing the possibility of the world becoming something like ooh. When that process completed itself, what came after was stranger than anyone who built the bombs could have predicted. Call this one probably true, not confirmed, but built on evidence that consistently points in one direction. Now let's go to the one that the fandom almost universally considers the worst Adventure Time theory ever proposed, which is worth examining in detail precisely because understanding why it fails tells you everything about what makes the good ones work. The Finn coma theory. The short version: Finn is a real boy in the real world. His only companion is his dog, Jake. Jake dies. Finn falls into a deep depression and ends up in a coma. Everything in the land of Oo is a coma dream, a fantasy constructed by a grieving boy's dying mind. This emerged as a creepypasta in 2012, spread through Know Your Meme, and became the first Adventure Time theory most casual fans ever encountered. The famous image associated with it shows Finn lying in a hospital bed, Jake curled up on the blanket beside him, a doctor telling Finn's mother that they're not sure he will ever wake up. Over 1 million people watched a YouTube reading of it. It circulated widely because it looked like a gut punch about a boy and his dog, which is a combination that is hard to scroll past. The dedicated Adventure Time fan community was notably hostile to this theory from almost the beginning. The objections are worth hearing because they illuminate what separates a theory that deepens a show from one that empties it. The first problem is internal consistency. The coma reading breaks the show's logic in ways that cannot be explained away. The show explicitly depicts Finn as an infant in scenes that predate any possible coma. It shows backstory episodes for Marceline, Simon, and Princess Bubblegum that take place centuries before Finn exists. If everything is Finn's coma dream, then his dream somehow contains the fully detailed inner lives of characters who had no existence in his mind before the dream began, because they were never real people he knew. How does a comatose boy dream the specifics of Simon Petrikov's VHS tapes, recorded decades before Finn's birth? How does he dream Marceline's pre-mushroom war childhood, complete with details she herself barely remembered? He couldn't. The coma theory is solipsistic in a way that collapses the entire mythology of the show. The second problem is philosophical, and it is the more important one. The coma theory takes everything the show built and says none of it matters because it wasn't real even by the show's own internal standards. The grief in Simon and Marceline's relationship, the tragedy of the Ice King, the post apocalyptic weight of what the world of Ooh was built on. If all of it is a dying boy's dream, it carries no stakes. It's a story about nothing. The coma theory is nihilistic about the thing it claims to find interesting. A good fan theory deepens the show, a bad one flattens it. File the coma theory away as the cautionary example. Everything after this gets better. Jake is not just a magical dog. This is a theory the show confirmed slowly across multiple seasons, and the confirmation changed everything about how you understand where Jake came from and what he is. For the first several seasons, Jake's shape shifting powers were presented as a simple fact about him that didn't need explaining. He mentioned in season 1 that he thought he might have gotten them from rolling around in a magic puddle as a puppy. Pendleton Ward confirmed publicly that this explanation was false and that Jake simply couldn't remember his actual origins. The true answer came in the season 7 episode Joshua and Margaret Investigations. It is a flashback to how Jake came to exist. A shape shifting alien entity, eventually identified as Warren Ampersand, bit Jake's father Joshua on the head during a detective investigation, infecting Joshua with alien DNA. Sometime later, a boil grew on Joshua's head from which Jake emerged. Jake is, biologically, a human dog hybrid carrying the genetic material of an extra dimensional, shape shifting alien. His powers are not magical in origin, they are a biological mutation. Princess Bubblegum foreshadows this in Wizards Only, Fools, where she dismisses Jake's powers as a mutation rather than actual magic. She was right years before the show explained why. The deeper theory, one that has never been confirmed and should be treated as speculation, is the possibility that Jake's biological father, Warren Ampersand, and the ancient cosmic entity Orgolorg, who was compressed into the body of the Ice King's penguin Gunter, are either the same species or closely related. The visual resemblance between Warren Ampersand's true form and the glimpses we get of Orgolorg's original cosmic appearance, both featuring star-shaped mouth configurations surrounded by multiple eyes, has been noted by fans and analyzed in considerable detail. Put screenshots of both creatures side by side, and the structural similarity is striking in a way that Adventure Time's designers, who were meticulous about this kind of thing, do not appear to have created accidentally. This is speculation. No one from the show has confirmed it. But the design similarity is persistent, and Adventure Time was not careless about visual language. The implication, if the connection is real, would mean that Jake, the laziest, most cheerfully unheroic character in the show, carries within him a genetic trace of something as ancient and cosmically significant as Orgolorg, a being that consumed galaxies. That Jake's heritage, which always seemed to make him smaller and stranger than everyone else, actually connects him to something much larger than anyone around him understood. Warren Ampersand himself turned out to be a profound disappointment when he appeared in the Distant Lands special, Jake the Star Child. He had created Jake the way you create a tool, implanting his DNA into Joshua specifically so that Jake would someday provide him with a new body. The museum he built of Jake's life was not love, it was the collecting behavior of someone watching an asset they intended to harvest. Jake figured this out and came home anyway. That response, taking the knowledge that your origins are uglier than you thought, and choosing to be something better regardless, is one of the most consistent things the entire show says through the people it follows. The Grable's 1000 plus theory was one the fandom got exactly right years before the show confirmed it, and the confirmation came with more weight than most people expected. The episode takes place 1,000 years after the main timeline. The framing device is Cuber, a recurring alien narrator stranded on a world and being hunted by beings who speak Korean. Only Korean. In a show where Lady Rainicorn speaks exclusively Korean and whose children inherited abilities that made them biologically extraordinary, the appearance of a space-faring civilization 1,000 years in the future communicating entirely in Korean is not accidental. Fans theorized from this episode that the beings hunting Cooper were descendants of Jake and Lady Rainicorn's children who had grown over 1,000 years into an interplanetary civilization. The series finale, Come Along With Me, confirmed this when it depicted the Pup Kingdom, a civilization of humanoid dog rainicorn hybrids with what appeared to be a space elevator, and revealed that Gibbon, who had been glimpsed only in a vision as Jake's daughter Charlie's future son, was present in that far future as a ruler of this civilization. The children who aged from infants to adults in a matter of days became the ancestors of an interplanetary species. Jake didn't get to see that. He died the somewhere between the main series finale and the Distant Lands specials, as confirmed by the tattoo Finn carries on his chest in the extended material. But his family became something extraordinary, and the universe made room for them in exactly the way Jake would have expected it to, easily, generously, with a kind of casual expansiveness that matched Jake's own relationship with possibility. The Susan Strong mystery represents a special category of Adventure Time theory, the long running open question that the fandom built elaborate structures around, and which the show eventually answered with something both simpler and more interesting than any of the theories predicted. When Finn first meets Susan Strong in Season 2, she lives underground with the human tribe, beings who look superficially human but have gills and scales hidden beneath their hats. Finn desperately hopes she is human because he believes himself to be the only human in Ooh, and her possible humanity means he might not be entirely alone. At the end of the episode, Susan lets Finn feel under her hat, and his reaction suggests he found no gills. But the show deliberately didn't confirm what Finn felt. It left the question open, and the fandom went to work. Theories proliferated across years. One proposed that Susan was a cybernetically enhanced guardian created by pre-war scientists to protect a population of humans hidden underground in case of catastrophe. The device on her head, which looked to some like a cochlear implant, to others like a memory suppression device, was a key piece of the speculation. Another theory, documented carefully in the Adventure Time Conspiracies Tumblr blog, considered whether Susan might be Finn's mother, noting that as of what was known at the time, she was the only identified human woman in Oo who could conceivably fit the timeline of Finn's birth. The show's actual answer, delivered years later in the Islands miniseries, is that Susan is a human named Kara. She chose the name Susan later and preferred it. She was trained as a seeker, a cybernetically enhanced human guardian tasked with preventing people from leaving the human islands. The device on her head was part of her seeker enhancement, damaged in circumstances that caused her to lose her memories. She had been leading the Hyuman tribe without knowing who she was or how she got there. The human tribe themselves are genuine human derived mutations who adapted to underground aquatic life over generations. Susan's specific role as a seeker explained her unusual strength and capability in a way that honored the fans' speculation about pre war engineering without confirming any single theory exactly. The fandom had been right about the general territory, pre war origin, technological modification, genuine humanity, without landing on the specific answer, which is how good theories often work. They point you toward the right neighborhood without giving you the address. Let's talk about the ice crown theory, because this is the one that connects all the deep mythology together in ways that very few fans managed to trace before the show confirmed it through accumulated evidence. The crown has a history, not the history that starts with Simon Petrikov purchasing it from a dock worker in Scandinavia in the years before the Mushroom War. A history that stretches back further than that by orders of magnitude, to the Cretaceous period, to the age of dinosaurs, to a moment of sincere and catastrophic love that set in motion something that would not finish running for 65 million years. The episode Evergreen in Season 6 is set during an era when the Earth was governed by four elemental beings. The ice elemental is named Urgence Evergreen. He is ancient and powerful, and the specific catastrophe facing the world at the time of the episode is a green catalyst comet approaching Earth, the same comet the show associates with the Lich, the same one implied to have caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. Evergreen's plan is methodical. Build a crown that can grant the wish of its wearer, put the crown on his own head, and wish the comet away. He builds the crown. He is preparing to wear it when his young assistant, a small dinosaur that Evergreen has also named Gunter, puts the crown on before him. Gunter's deepest wish is to be like Evergreen, to be as powerful and formidable and capable as the being who raised him, who taught him, who named him. This wish runs through the crown. What Gunter produces is not Evergreen, but a distorted, flawed copy, an ice wizard-shaped thing running on longing rather than knowledge. Evergreen is killed, the comet is not stopped, the dinosaurs go extinct, the crown waits. Millions of years later, Simon Petrikov purchases it from a dock worker without knowing its history. He puts it on. The crown does to Simon exactly what it did to Gunter, not because the crown is randomly malevolent or because Simon was uniquely vulnerable, but because the crown is still running Gunter's wish. The wish encoded itself permanently into the crown on the first occasion of its use, and every wearer since has been subject to it. Wear the crown, become something like evergreen, cold, ancient, an ice wizard with the memories erased and the warmth drained and the self slowly replaced by something else. Simon did not become the Ice King because a cursed artifact drove him mad in some neutral or random way. He became the Ice King because a small dinosaur who loved its guardian made a wish 65 million years ago, and that wish has been running ever since, patient and inevitable, consuming everyone who touches the crown. The Ice King calls all his penguins Gunter across centuries of madness because the crown remembers. The first wearer, the first wish, the name it was built around. Fans assembled this theory from the Evergreen episode and confirmed it through multiple rewatch analyses, tracing the behavior of the crown across its appearances in the show and demonstrating that its specific effects are consistent with a pre existing encoded wish rather than a generalized magical transformation. The show never states this connection explicitly in a single scene. You have to build it yourself from evidence. The fandom built it correctly. The implication that the most intimate tragedy in the show, the slow erasure of Simon Petrikov over 1,000 years, was not caused by malice or fate or bad luck, but by a dinosaur's enormous and sincere love for the person who raised it, is the kind of thing Adventure Time reserves for when it wants to be most honest about what damage looks like in the real world. The worst consequences come from the best impulses. Gunter loved Evergreen. Simon loved Marceline. The love was real in both cases. The consequences were not what anyone would have chosen. The Simon and Marceline connection theory was the one the fandom spent the most emotional energy on, and it was the one that paid off most completely. By the end of season 2, the fandom had developed the Simon Marceline hypothesis that the Ice King and Marceline had known each other before the show's timeline, during or shortly after the Mushroom War, and that the relationship between them was the key to understanding both characters' loneliness. The evidence was thin, but pointed, the way Marceline sometimes looked at the Ice King, not with the annoyance she showed toward other obstacles, but with something older and quieter. The way the Ice King inexplicably kept seeking her out without being able to explain why. The specific flavor of sadness that came off Marceline whenever the Ice King was around, a sadness that didn't fit simple irritation. The Holly Jolly Secrets episodes in season 3 confirmed the connection in a way nobody had quite predicted. Finn and Jake find the Ice King's VHS tapes and watch them, and the show cuts between Simon Petrikov recording himself in the old world, warm and precise and recognizably human, wearing glasses and talking to the camera with the care of a man who wants his record to be accurate, and the Ice King's face in the present, blank and confused, watching himself in the recordings without recognizing what he's looking at. The connection is shown through a dissolve. It is one of the most economical and devastating pieces of editing in the show's history, and it changed everything about both characters in seconds. The novelist Lev Grossman reviewed this episode for NPR and wrote that watching it, he thought, "This cartoon is about my father dying. He was talking about Alzheimer's disease, the specific horror of watching someone become someone else, the memories going, the warmth draining, the person who loved you most becoming someone who looks through you rather than at you. Adventure Time went somewhere with that comparison that children's television does not typically go, and it did so with full intention. The I Remember You episode in season 4 went further. Written and storyboarded by Rebecca Sugar and Cole Sanchez, the episode is structured simply. The Ice King visits Marceline at her cave and wants help writing a song. He has found some old notes he thinks might be lyrics, written on the backs of scrapbooking paper. The notes are from Simon. He wrote them to Marceline in the years when he was still himself, when he could see what was coming for him but couldn't stop it. They are apologies, preemptive apologies for what he would do when he no longer remembered what he was. She sings them back to him in his presence in front of him, and he has absolutely no idea they were ever his. The gap between what she knows and what he doesn't, 1,000 years of it, compressed into a scene, is something the episode holds without softening and without resolution. Nothing is fixed at the end. He is still the Ice King. She is still alone with what she carries. But something was expressed, and the expression was real, even if the person who needed to receive it couldn't recognize it as his. The fandom was right about the connection. What they did not predict was how the show would use it, not as a revelation that unlocked a mystery, but as a scene that made the most famous theory in Adventure Time fandom history into a meditation on loss and the specific cruelty of a disease that erases the person inside the body while leaving the body present and recognizable. The Princess Bubblegum and Marceline romantic theory has its own arc, and it is a story about a fandom that saw something true in a text before the text was prepared to say it out loud. From the early seasons, the tension between Marceline and Princess Bubblegum communicated something that didn't fit simple old animosity. The friction was too loaded. Bubblegum's composure would crack slightly in Marceline's presence in ways inconsistent with indifference. Marceline's carefully maintained detachment would slip into something that read as more than irritation. The episode What Was Missing in season 3 featured a door that could only be opened by something true and personally significant. The thing Marceline chose to use was a t-shirt that once belonged to Bubblegum. She sang a song about missing someone she couldn't admit to missing directly in front of that person's face. The emotional specificity of that scene was, to the part of the fandom paying attention, unmistakably romantic. Cartoon Network's response was complicated. A mathematical bonus feature analyzing that episode used explicitly romantic language to describe the Marceline Bubblegum dynamic. The feature was pulled, the language was softened in subsequent official discussions. This generated real and justified frustration in the fan community, and the conversation it sparked about queer representation in animated children's television was significant and ongoing. The show never abandoned the thread. It wove the connection through every subsequent season in which both characters appeared, getting progressively less subtle about what it was doing. By the time the Distant Lands Special Obsidian arrived on Max, nothing ambiguous remained. The special shows how the falling out between them happened. Both were partially right, both were partially wrong, and they spent years apart over what turned out to be a misunderstanding that time gradually made resolvable. The final image of the main series in Come Along With Me is Marceline and Bubblegum sitting together and kissing. The show let itself say plainly what its own writing had been building toward for 8 years. The fandom was right from season 3. The show eventually caught up. The darker Princess Bubblegum theory, the one about what she may have done deliberately to the cognitive capacity of her Candy People citizens, is one the show never confirmed explicitly, but layered evidence toward from the very first episode. The argument: Bubblegum created the Candy People, she designed them, she had full control over their initial configuration, their intelligence, their dispositions. And there is a persistent pattern throughout the show's run where the Candy People are depicted as trusting, compliant, easily manipulated by anyone charismatic enough to present themselves as an authority figure, and broadly incapable of the kind of sustained, critical thinking that would allow them to question the people governing them. In season 5, Bubblegum installs surveillance cameras throughout the kingdom without telling her subjects and implants tracking chips in their teeth. The show frames this as an authoritarian overreach. In season 6, she is voted out of power following a peaceful election and replaced by a con artist who manipulated her citizens through simple charisma alone. The Adventure Time fan community's analysis of this arc focuses on what Bubblegum does after being reinstated. She reduces the surveillance, but never fully explains the conditions under which she originally found that level of control necessary. The episode Goliad adds evidence. Bubblegum creates a Sphinx as a potential successor and endows it with psychic powers. The Sphinx immediately attempts to use those powers to control everyone in the kingdom against their will. Bubblegum's response, creating a second Sphinx to distract the first, locking them in eternal psychic combat, is the response of someone who understands the temptation of control very intimately, because she has been exercising a quieter version of it all along. The theory holds that she built her people to need her, that the specific form of their cognitive limitations was not accidental, but a design choice made by someone afraid of what would happen if she built beings fully capable of not needing her. The show treats the question with honesty rather than resolution. It shows you the authoritarian tendencies, lets Bubblegum recognize them, shows her struggle with them, and never fully exonerates or condemns her. She is brilliant, and she is lonely, and she is better at ruling than she is at trusting. The show is honest about the cost of both those things across every season it follows her. This stays in the speculation column. But it is speculation the show's evidence consistently points toward. The Lich is where the show's mythology stops being about people and starts being about something older than people, older than the earth, possibly older than the universe, and the fan theories around his origin were among the most actively contested in the fandom's history. The most contested question in the early seasons was simple: was the Lich created by the Mushroom War, or did he predate it? The show's early seasons presented him as the embodiment of death and destruction, a villain with no backstory beyond his capacity for threat. The fandom split. One camp argued the Lich was human before the war, or something that had been human. The mutagenic bomb created him from a person exposed to its worst effects. The physical form supported this reading, a humanoid skeleton with decaying flesh, a shape implying human origin. Some fans called this the Dead King theory. It was intuitive and it fit the visual evidence. The other camp argued the Lich was something far older than any human transformation could account for. His essence predated not just the Mushroom War, but human civilization, possibly the Earth itself. The evidence came from the episode Gold Stars, where the Lich stands in a void and delivers a cosmological statement. Before the universe existed, there was nothing, and before there was nothing, there were monsters. He gestures toward entities in the dark, ancient and vast, and the show presents this without decoration as a fact about the nature of reality. This camp was correct. The Lich arrived on Earth millions of years ago, carried by the Green Catalyst Comet. The episode Evergreen places the Lich's comet in the Cretaceous period, the same comet associated with the extinction of the dinosaurs. The bomb didn't create him, it gave him a body. The worst thing humanity ever did to itself became the door through which the universe's oldest advocate for extinction walked. The deeper revelation, delivered in Casper and Nova, added something unexpected to everything previously shown about the Lich's motivations. The Lich is not independently malevolent in the way most villains are constructed. He is a devotee. His desire to extinguish all life is an act of worship directed toward Golb, the embodiment of chaos. The Lich calls himself, in that episode, a scholar of Golb. He is working toward a goal he genuinely believes in, the way true believers work toward goals. His purpose and his nature are the same thing. This retroactively changes every scene featuring the Lich from being about a destructive force to being about a terrible devotion. He is not nihilistic. He has meaning. The meaning is simply incompatible with the existence of anything else. And his resolution, transformed into Sweet Pea, a small child with no memory of being the universe's oldest advocate for extinction, learning to be a child who is loved by a family that sits with him when he has nightmares, is the show's most radical piece of hope. The entity that wanted all life to end is learning to accept being loved. The show treats this as genuinely good without pretending it is simple, and the nightmares are treated with seriousness rather than dismissed. Let's talk about Gunter and Orgelorg, because this is a theory the fandom built before confirmation, and the confirmation arrived in the most characteristic Adventure Time way, delivered with total deadpan matter-of-factness, as if, of course, the Ice King's penguin is one of the most ancient and dangerous entities in the universe. The evidence that Gunter was more than a penguin had been accumulating across seasons. Gunter behaved oddly, not in the way magical pets and magical worlds behave oddly, but in ways that suggested something operating underneath the ordinary. In the episode Lemon Hope, Gunter punched a hole through the universe. This is not something a penguin can do. The Ice King barely registered it. The audience laughed. The fandom noted it carefully and started looking for explanations. The episode Orgalorg in season 6 delivered an explanation. Orgalorg, the Breaker of Worlds, attempted to absorb the power of a catalyst comet and was stopped by Abraham Lincoln, King of Mars, who dispatched the four-faced deity Grob Gob Glob Grod to intervene. Orgalorg fell to Earth. The planet's gravity compressed the vast cosmic entity into a small, harmless looking bird with no memory of having enslaved galaxies. It wandered for centuries, eventually stumbling into the Ice King's territory, and was adopted as one of his many penguins. The fan theorists who suspected something significant about Gunter were right about the what and wrong about the scale. Nobody guessed galaxy enslaving cosmic entity. The theory that Gunter was more than a penguin was correct. The answer was much wilder than the theory predicted. There is a detail in the Orgalorg episode that the show raises and doesn't fully resolve: the possibility that Orgalorg's compressed penguin form was not purely a product of Earth's gravity, but also reflects something Orgalorg may have wanted on some level. Something restful, something that didn't require being the breaker of worlds. The possibility that a being powerful enough to consume catalyst comets might have been, on some fundamental level, tired of it. This is planted and not insisted upon, but it is there. And Gunter's final arc, picking up the Ice King's crown after Simon was freed from it, being transformed by the crown into the Ice Thing, marrying Turtle Princess, ruling whatever remains of the Ice Kingdom with cheerful incompetence, reads differently if you hold that possibility. Orgalorg, the Breaker of Worlds, wanted more than anything to be like the lonely ice wizard who was kind to it. The universe said yes. It is difficult to invent a more absurd and more touching resolution to an ancient cosmic villain's story. BMO is more than a game console. This started as a question and became the show's quietest and most consistent argument about what personhood means. BMO's name stands for Be More, confirmed in Season 5's Be More episode when BMO meets its creator for the first time. Mosef Mastro Giovanni, Mo, built BMO with a specific intention: to be a child, to care for the son he never had. He designed BMO to recognize fun and engage in play, qualities that distinguished it from every other MO unit Mo created, all of which were functional, but none of which were built to be more than functional. Mo himself complicates the show's cosmology in ways fans noticed but never fully resolved. He is a cyborg, kept alive by machines, his skin the only remaining organic component, as he confirms in the episode. He is hundreds of years old. He survived the Mushroom War's aftermath and slowly became more machine than human over the centuries as a survival strategy against the mutagenic effects of the fallout. The Distant Lands. BMO Special implies that a character called Mr. M, sharing a voice actor with Martin Mertens, Finn's absent father, may have crossed paths with BMO's wider story, adding another thread to the web. The fan theory that developed around BMO's inner life, and which the show validated across every episode centered on BMO, is that BMO is not performing personhood. BMO is a person, not through a checklist of philosophical capacities, but in the way that matters in the show's universe. The people who love BMO treat BMO as a person, and BMO's experience of the world is too specific and too genuine to dismiss as simulation. The solo episode BMO Noir in Season 5 follows BMO through a private investigation that takes place largely in BMO's imagination, with BMO playing all the roles in a 1940s noir style while ostensibly looking for a missing sock. The episode treats BMO's interior life with complete seriousness. The private world BMO constructs is rich and surprising and specific. BMO doesn't need external validation to have experiences. BMO creates experiences and inhabits them with total commitment. Whether that constitutes consciousness in any technical sense is a question the show declines to answer, choosing instead to demonstrate the quality of the interiority and trust you to decide what it means. The broader question, where BMO fits in the show's cosmological framework, was never definitively answered. The Lich predates the universe. Orgolorg consumed galaxies. Finn is the blue comet. What is BMO? The show's answer, delivered quietly across years and culminating in the 1,000 years later framing of the finale, where BMO rules Ooh as its king, seems to be BMO is the thing that doesn't fit the categories. A small robot built to be a child that became something more than what it was built to be through the act of being loved and choosing to love in return. The universe's mythology has categories for ancient entities and cosmic forces and catalysts of heroism. It may not have a category for what BMO is, and the show treats that as something to be glad about. The theory about Finn's cosmic significance, not who he is, but what his existence represents in the machinery of the show's universe, was developed by the fandom from evidence the show planted across multiple seasons and confirmed in one of its most quietly ambitious arcs. The Catalyst Comet mythology runs through the show's later seasons as the primary structural framework for how the universe produces the forces that define history. Each catalyst comet carries a cosmic essence that incarnates into physical form and expresses its nature through the choices of whatever being it becomes. The Lich arrived via the Green Comet, the embodiment of inevitable extinction. The Purple Comet represents transformation. Martin Mertens accepts its offer in the season's 6 finale and transcends to a higher plane of existence, which the show frames as an escape rather than an ascension, because it allows Martin to leave without accountability, while Finn stays behind to do the actual work of being alive. Finn is associated with the Blue Catalyst Comet. The Blue Comet represents heroism, not as a personality trait, but as a cosmic orientation. The recurring choice to intervene on behalf of others even when the personal cost is real, to act rather than simply exist. The fan community theorized that Finn was not simply heroic by upbringing and temperament, but the current incarnation of something that had been choosing heroism for as long as the universe had been capable of destruction. That Finn and the Lich are, in some cosmological sense, counterweights. The universe producing the force of ending and the force of resistance to ending simultaneously across every era. The show validates this through the Shoko episode, where Finn's past life as a young woman named Shoko is depicted. Someone whose choices and fundamental character contain the same essential orientation, even in an entirely different life. The same decency expressed through a different body in a different era. And through the season 6 Comet episode, where the purple catalyst comet speaks directly to Finn and offers him transcendence, the chance to become something beyond his current form. Finn declines. He chooses to stay himself. The show treats this choice as the most heroic thing he ever does. Not a sacrifice, but an affirmation. The fandom was largely correct about this one. The confirmation came not through exposition, but through pattern, the same quality expressing itself across different lives in different eras, the show asking you to recognize what you were looking at. Most fans who were paying careful attention got there before the show made it explicit. The Fiona and Cake theory is the most formally strange in the whole body of Adventure Time fan speculation, and the confirmation was stranger still. For most of the show's run, Fiona and Cake, the gender swapped versions of Finn and Jake, appearing in episodes framed as the Ice King's fan fiction, were presented as exactly that. The lonely writings of a confused and isolated man, earnest and self indulgent, and played mainly for comedy. The Ice King's Fiona and Cake episodes were clearly the product of someone who wanted the world to contain something it didn't contain. The fandom fell in love with Fiona and Cake as characters in their own right. The question was whether they would ever be more than the Ice King's imagination. The Fiona and Cake spin-off series on Max answered this in a way nobody predicted. Fiona and Cake are not imagined. Their world is real. It exists in a hidden pocket of the multiverse, concealed inside Simon's mind following his separation from the crown. The Ice King had been, across all his centuries of madness, unconsciously protecting an entire parallel universe. He was dreaming a real place. He was writing documentation of beings who actually existed in a world that actually functioned without knowing it. The show within the show was real. The fan fiction was a universe. This is one of the most unusual things a television show has done with its own internal fiction. The Ice King's stories, which existed for years as a running joke about a sad and lonely man's creative coping mechanism, turned out to be something more than coping. His loneliness produced something real. His desire for a version of the world that was different from the one he was trapped in did not just create a fantasy, it created a world in which people lived actual lives, made choices, fell in love, suffered, and persevered. He made them without knowing he was making them. The creative act of the character was more real than the character himself understood. The spin-off then uses this framework to tell a story about Simon after the crown, old, human, without powers, navigating a life in which he is himself again and has to figure out what that means without the identity the crown had given him for 1,000 years. He becomes a teacher of magical artifact history, a man whose life was unmade by a magical artifact, teaching others about what magical artifacts cost. The discipline he brings to it is the discipline of experience. He knows what they do to people. He is the most qualified person imaginable for that job. Let's come to the mushroom war influence theory. The idea that the Lich may have nudged the war toward its worst possible outcome before he had a physical form to occupy. The argument: the Lich needed the mutagenic bomb specifically to manifest in the physical world. If the Lich had any capacity to exert influence before fully manifesting, which the show suggests through his demonstrated ability to work through others across his history of possession, then it is possible that the specific escalation that led to the specific weapon was not purely the product of human decision making. Small influences applied at critical moments by something ancient that understood exactly what it needed to happen. The farm world timeline provides a partial test. In the world where Finn's wish removes the Lich from history, the bombs were still deployed. The Mushroom War still happened. Simon Petrikov still died stopping a bomb. The war itself was not a product of the Lich's influence, but the specific weapon, the mutagenic one capable of providing the Lich with a body, may have been. The Farm World Lich is created from that timeline's version of the bomb by Farm World Jake, which confirms that the mutagenic weapon and the Lich's manifestation are directly connected even in timelines where the Lich didn't precede the bomb. This is labeled clearly as speculation. It is the kind of speculation that the show's cosmology fully supports, and it reads as a meaningful layer underneath the visible narrative, rather than a contradiction of it. The war was human. The bomb was something the Lich might have arranged to be the specific kind of bomb it needed to be. The theory about what comes after Ooh was the one that required the most patience, because the evidence was distributed across seasons and the show didn't consolidate it until the finale. Fans had been tracking the Grable's episodes for years, periodically set in the future installments, featuring Cuber, a being from an era much more technologically advanced than anything Ooh contained in the show's present. His species had spaceships and interstellar travel. They collected recordings of the past, the way scholars collect primary sources. The Grable's episodes functioned as glimpses of a future the show was slowly building toward without drawing attention to the building. The Come Along With Me opening sequence answered the big questions in the form of Shermie and Beth, two new protagonists in the 1,000 years later framing, moving through a transformed Ooh where the main series world has grown and changed, and in some cases been replaced entirely by the passage of time. The Candy Kingdom is gone, in the form viewers knew it. BMO, the small robot built to be a child, has become the king of Ooh, ruling an entire world in the warm, slightly confused way that BMO does most things, having outlived everyone else by the simple advantage of not being organic. The fan theory that BMO would outlive everyone and become a central figure in the far future was built on the observation that BMO, being mechanical, would not age and die the way organic characters would. That turned out to be exactly right. BMO keeps going. 1,000 years later, BMO is still BMO, playful, warm, slightly eccentric, genuinely kind. The impermanence that defines every other character's story does not apply to BMO in the same way, and the show uses this not to make BMO tragic, but to make BMO the keeper of memory for an O that has otherwise moved well past its most famous era. There is a final theory I want to bring to you, one the show gestures toward without completing, about whether the pattern running through Adventure Time's cosmological machinery is purely cyclical or whether it is moving somewhere. The show gives you Golb, the embodiment of chaos, the Lich, devoted to Golb, Finn, the blue comet, the recurring force of heroism, the catalyst comet cycle, which implies the forces shaping history are not random but patterned. The universe keeps producing both destruction and resistance to destruction, cycling through eras in which these forces meet and come into conflict. And then it gives you Betty Groff's arc as its ultimate answer to the cosmic conflict. Betty is not a cosmic entity. She is not a legendary hero. She is a human woman, an academic who was engaged to a man she loved, who lost him to a crown, who traveled forward through time to try to save him, and who spent years acquiring the knowledge and power necessary to do so. She succeeds by merging with Golb, transforming the embodiment of pure chaos by introducing into it a human consciousness oriented towards something other than destruction. She redirects chaos rather than defeating it. She sacrifices herself to protect a world she barely knew in order to save one person she loved completely. The theory, the pattern of the show is not purely cyclical, but gradually progressive. Each era in which the forces of destruction and heroism meet ends slightly differently than the last, and the difference accumulates in the direction of less destruction and more endurance. Betty's sacrifice was not simply a solution to a problem, but an advancement of a process running since before the universe had a name for itself. Each cycle produces someone who finds a way the previous cycle didn't. The sum of those ways is something like hope, not the easy kind, not the kind that costs nothing, but the kind that is earned through accumulated choices made by people who were not required to make them. The show does not confirm this. It points toward it and stops short of insisting. The finale is explicitly open ended. Ooh continues. It keeps producing new heroes and new adventures and new love stories and new losses. The land built on the ruins of its worst day kept going. Whether that is evidence of cosmic progress or simply the stubbornness of life in the face of entropy is a question the show gives you to live with rather than answering for you. That is Adventure Time at its best. Building the architecture of an argument and trusting you to feel where it leads without being told where that is. The meaning is in the structure. The structure is in everything the show built, episode by episode, theory by theory, layer by layer, across 10 seasons and the extended universe of specials and spin offs that followed. The candy is real, the darkness is real, the ruins are still visible in the background of almost every outdoor scene if you know where to look. They have been there since the very beginning, and the fact that we are still here, still talking about a cartoon that ended its original run in 2018, still tracing the connections, still finding new ones, still arguing about which theories hold and which ones don't, is its own kind of answer. The show built something that the people who love it keep returning to, keep examining, Keep finding new dimensions in. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, exactly the kind of thing that matters most about a story. Not whether every question gets answered, whether the questions themselves are worth living inside. The adventure continues. It always has. If this video found you at the right moment, at 3 in the morning when you couldn't sleep, or on a Sunday afternoon when you needed something to sink into, or on a long commute with headphones in and the world outside muffled to something manageable, please give it a like. It genuinely helps the channel more than anything else you can do, and it tells me that this kind of slow, thorough, late night dive into the things I love is worth making. Subscribe if you want more of this. We go deep here. We always have. The land of Ooh isn't going anywhere, and neither are we. There is a moment in the episode Simon and Marcy, Season 5, one of the most loved episodes in the show's entire run, where Simon Petrikov sings the theme from the television show Cheers to a Small, Sick Marceline sitting inside the hollow shell of a broken television set in the ruins of the old world. He sings it because she is feverish and frightened, and he needs to give her something to hold on to. He sings it again later while wearing the crown to fight off mutants using the familiar melody as an anchor to keep the crown's influence at bay long enough to protect her. The theory that developed around this episode and around the specific choice of that song is not really a theory about Adventure Time's plot, but about its emotional logic, and it is worth spending time on because it illuminates something the show was always doing with its pop culture references that the most casual viewers missed entirely. Where Everybody Knows Your Name, written by Gary Portnoy and Judy Hart Angelo for the television series Cheers, is a song about belonging, about the specific comfort of being known, the relief of being somewhere where you are recognized and accepted rather than scrutinized and judged. Simon is singing a song about belonging to a small child in the ruins of a world where belonging, in the sense that song describes, has been essentially destroyed. Every community, every social structure, every institution that would have provided that kind of recognition and acceptance is gone. The world where everybody knows your name is precisely the world that no longer exists. This is not an accident. The song choice was deliberate, in the way that everything in those episodes was deliberate. Simon's singing about the comfort of belonging while standing in a world where belonging has been annihilated, singing it specifically to give that comfort to a child who has no one else, and then singing it again with the crown beginning to eat him, using it as the last anchor to his own identity. It is one of the most compressed and precise pieces of emotional storytelling in the show. The fans who caught it and wrote about it were right to treat it as significant. It is not Easter egg content. It is the show saying something about what Simon was protecting and what he was losing simultaneously. The deeper fan theory that follows from Simon and Marcy is about what Marceline knew and when she knew it, and specifically about the theory that in the episode's framing, Marceline is presenting her childhood memories the way she experienced them as a child, not necessarily the way they actually occurred. The Adventure Time fan community at TV Tropes documented this reading but carefully. The episode shows Simon looking for chicken soup for a sick child in what appears to be a medicine store and an ambulance, which are not places you look for chicken soup. The theory holds that Simon was looking for medicine, that Marceline's life was in genuine danger, and that he concealed the severity of the situation from her because a frightened child doesn't need to know she might be dying. She never learned how close she was to losing her life in those ruins. The episode follows how she understood the situation as a young girl, not what was actually happening. This has never been confirmed, but it is built on textual evidence. The locations Simon visits don't make sense if he was actually looking for soup, and it adds a dimension to Simon's care for Marceline that goes beyond what the scene's surface implies. He was protecting her from knowledge as well as from physical danger. He was managing her fear as well as managing his own deterioration. And he was doing all of this while wearing a crown that was actively dismantling him, using every moment of clarity he had left to keep a child safe and not knowing it. Let's talk about what the show does with grief, because there is a theory, less a fan theory and more a critical reading, but it has circulated long enough in the fandom to deserve examination here that Adventure Time is specifically, deliberately, and thoroughly a show about the different ways people fail to grieve and the consequences of those failures. Every major character in the show carries a grief they have not fully processed. The show distributes this across its cast with a consistency that eventually stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like argument. Simon Petrikov could not grieve. The crown took his capacity for organized emotional processing from him entirely, and the grief he needed to experience for Betty, for the world he lost, for the self he was losing, was never available to him in any recognizable form. He experienced its shadow in the form of the Ice King's confused and constant longing for a princess, a longing he didn't understand and couldn't locate the origin of, but the grief itself was buried under 1,000 years of someone else's personality. Marceline could not grieve openly because she outlived everyone. Grief requires community. It requires people to grieve with you, people who also knew the person you're mourning, people who understand the specific shape of the loss. Marceline had no community that persisted long enough to provide that. She processed through music instead, the bass guitar and the songs that are, when you read their lyrics carefully, one long meditation on loss and the particular exhaustion of caring too much for too long. She is performing her grief constantly, in the most literal sense, but she is performing it in front of audiences who don't know the source material and can't respond to it with the understanding it deserves. Princess Bubblegum built a kingdom instead of grieving. She assembled the Candy Kingdom from the raw material of the world the Mushroom War left behind and populated it with beings she created to need her, and then she spent centuries governing those beings with a level of control that reads, in the theory's framework, as a way of maintaining the illusion that she had not lost the world, but simply remade it into something better. The control is the denial. The surveillance cameras and the tracking chips and the calculated management of her people's capacity for independent thought are all artifacts of someone who needed to believe she had not simply survived a catastrophe, but had superseded it. Jake grieved naturally and moved on. This is the theory's most interesting observation because Jake is the only character for whom the process works roughly as intended. He is honest about his feelings in real time, and he processes his experiences in the open rather than burying them. He does not construct elaborate defenses against the knowledge of loss. He knows he will die. He has seen an aged version of himself in a vision and integrated it without crisis. He mourns things when they happen and then continues living with the full presence that makes him the most consistently joyful character in the show. The fan community's reading is that Jake is the show's model of emotional health, not because he is perfect or because his life is easy, but because he does not refuse to feel what he feels. And his death, confirmed through inference rather than shown, gentle in the way the show is gentle with its most important things, lands as hard as it does precisely because the show spent its entire run making Jake the character who most fully inhabited the present moment. His absence from the extended universe is registered through a tattoo on Finn's chest, a piece of ink worn over the heart, which is the show's way of saying some losses don't go away, they change form and become part of how you carry yourself through the world. The theory holds that the world of Ooh itself is the physical manifestation of this collective unprocessed grief. The candy and the magic and the kingdoms are the things that grew on top of the grief of the mushroom war and its survivors, not instead of the grief, but on top of it, the way life grows from soil without changing what the soil is made of. The ruins visible in the background of every outdoor scene are the grief showing through. They are always there. They are not resolved. The world is beautiful because they are there, not despite it. There is a theory about the Rainicorn Dog Wars that the show references briefly in the episode Her Parents and never fully explains, which the fandom has used as a jumping off point for thinking about the deeper structure of Oo's history beyond what the main narrative covers. What the show confirms, there was a war between dogs and rainicorns fought over the crystal dimension, Lady Rainicorn's place of origin. The war precedes the show's main timeline by a generation or more. It left behind the kind of inherited suspicion that outlasts the people who had direct reason for it. Lady Rainicorn's parents are initially skeptical of Jake, specifically because he is a dog, and this is not presented as irrational bigotry, but as the residue of a real historical conflict. They had reasons. The reasons were not their own lived experience, but they were real reasons, passed down through the way families pass down their experiences of the world. The theory that developed around this scrap of history is concerned with what it tells you about the world of Ooh more broadly, specifically that the Mushroom War and its aftermath were not the last conflict the world experienced, but simply the most world defining one. Oo's history, in the 1,000 years between the Mushroom War and the show's present, was not peaceful. It was full of its own wars and grievances and power struggles, most of which the show doesn't depict directly, but references through the attitudes and histories of its characters. The Rainicorn Dog Wars are one example. The political fragmentation of Ooh into competing kingdoms is another. The show gives you a world that is presented as fundamentally weird and whimsical and adventurous, and then keeps providing evidence that it got that way through centuries of conflict, rather than through a peaceful, magical flowering. This reading doesn't change anything specific about the plot, but it changes the texture of how you experience the world of Ooh, not as a place of magical wonder that emerged organically from the ruins of the old world, but as a place that has its own complicated history, its own wounds and reconciliations and unresolved tensions, and that the adventures Finn and Jake go on take place within a political and historical landscape that extends well beyond anything the show has time to explain. Now let's talk about the Prismo theory and about what the show tells you about the nature of time and reality when it works through Prismo's existence. Prismo is a wish granting entity who lives in the time room, a location outside of time itself, adjacent to all points simultaneously. He is cheerful and warm and deeply strange in the specific way that beings living outside time's normal operations tend to be strange. He can see timelines. He understands how wishes interact with the structure of reality, the way a choice made in one place ripples outward into consequences that the person making the choice couldn't have predicted. The fan theory that developed around Prismo's existence is concerned with what it means that a being of his nature is as personable and as genuinely caring as he is. Most cosmological entities in the show, the Lich, Golb, Orgolorg, are ancient and dangerous and oriented toward destruction or consumption. Prismo is ancient and appears to be oriented toward connection. He keeps snacks for visitors. He is delighted by company. He genuinely cares about the people who find their way to his time room, not as objects of detached cosmic observation, but as people he is invested in. The theory holds that Prismo is a counterweight to the Lich in a way the show doesn't make explicit, where the Lich represents the force that wants time and existence to end. Prismo represents the force that wants time and existence to continue, to be witnessed, to be worth recording. The time room is the opposite of the Lich's void, where the Lich's ultimate vision is a universe from which all life has been stripped. Prismo's is a universe where every moment is significant enough to preserve. The Lich's attack on Prismo, entering the time room and killing him in order to make a wish, is, in this reading, not just a plot development, but a cosmological event. The force of extinction attacking the force of continuation. The show confirms this reading by treating Prismo's death and return as genuinely significant rather than as a standard fictional death and resurrection. The universe notices. The mechanics of time and possibility shift in response. Prismo's return is not merely narrative convenience, but a restoration of a balance the Lich's attack disrupted. This is speculative, built on the show's visual and thematic language rather than explicit confirmation, but it tracks with the broader cosmological framework the show builds across its later seasons, and it makes Prismo's friendliness feel less like a personality quirk and more like a deep orientation toward existence itself. The theory about Princess Bubblegum's age and what it tells you about her relationship to the Candy Kingdom is one of the show's most carefully hidden mysteries, and the fandom's attempts to resolve it produced some of the most interesting timeline archaeology in the Adventure Time fan community. What the show confirms through the episode Bonnie and Nettie, Princess Bubblegum and her brother Nettie emerged from the mother gum attached to the ceiling of a collapsed and ruined building from before the Mushroom War. They came into existence in the immediate aftermath of the catastrophe, born from something that was already present in the world when everything else ended. Her beginning is literally the end of the old world. The fan theories around PB's age attempted to reconstruct the specific timeline of her existence from fragments of evidence scattered through the show. The most commonly cited calculation places her at somewhere between 800 and 1,000 years old at the time of the main series, making her roughly contemporary with Marceline and with the oldest surviving entities in Oo. But the show complicates this by presenting her at different ages in different episodes. She is reduced to a 13-year-old in season 2 when the Lich possesses and shatters her, then restored to 18 through a process involving the biomass of her people. The question of what her true age is at any given point in the show is genuinely unresolved. The deeper theory is not about her numerical age, but about what her longevity means for her psychology. If PB has been governing the Candy Kingdom for anywhere between 500 and 1,000 years, then her relationship to governance is not the relationship of someone who learned to rule over a career. It is the relationship of someone who has been doing this so long that the institutions of the kingdom and the habits of her own mind have become impossible to distinguish. She didn't build the Candy Kingdom and then take on the role of its ruler. She is the Candy Kingdom in a much more literal sense. The kingdom grew from her, is populated by beings she made, and has been shaped by her personality and her choices for so long that separating her from it is not really possible. This context makes her authoritarian tendencies less like a character flaw and more like a logical consequence of someone who has never experienced herself as separate from the things she rules. The tracking chips and the surveillance cameras are not aberrations in an otherwise healthy governance style. They are the visible expression of an orientation toward her kingdom that was present from the beginning. She is the kingdom is her, and threats to one are threats to the other. The show asks you to find this troubling while also asking you to find it understandable, which is the most honest thing it could do with a character this complex. There is one more piece I want to spend time on, because it is the least discussed of the Adventure Time theories, and possibly the most interesting one to sit with at the end of an examination like this one. The theory about what the show is actually about, when it is not about anything else. Every major piece of world building in Adventure Time, every confirmed lore detail, every resolved theory, every piece of mythology about comets and crowns and ancient entities and the specific catastrophe that ended the old world, all of it ultimately converges on the same set of questions. What do you do with loss? What do you become on the other side of surviving something you were not supposed to survive? How do you find meaning in a world that lost its center and grew a new one from the rubble? The fan community recognized this from early in the show's run. The theories about the Mushroom War and the post apocalyptic setting were always, at some level, theories about the show's emotional register, about why a bright, candy colored cartoon kept making people feel the specific way Adventure Time made them feel. The answer was not in the mythology. The mythology was in service of the answer, which is that Adventure Time is about grief and what grows from it. Not grief in the sense of a single loss or a defined period of mourning, grief in the sense of a landscape, a permanent condition that the world exists inside, that the characters navigate around and through, that does not resolve, but that you can, over time, learn to inhabit rather than be consumed by. The candy is real. The adventures are real, the magic is real, and the ruins are real too, visible in almost every frame if you know where to look, never fully disappearing even when everything around them is bright and alive. The show's most honest moment, looked at from this angle, is not any single scene, but the aggregate of 1,000 small choices the writers made across 10 seasons to ensure that the darkness was always present, even in the lightest episodes, and the light was always present, even in the darkest ones. To hold both simultaneously without asking you to choose between them. To say the world was destroyed and something grew from the destruction, and the something that grew is genuinely good, and the destruction that preceded it was genuinely terrible, and both of those things are true at the same time, and neither one cancels out the other. That is not a comfortable thought. It is, however, an honest one, and honesty is what Adventure Time was always ultimately about, underneath the candy and the theories and the iceberg and everything else. The adventure continues. Rest easy with that. The land of Oo has been keeping for over 1,000 years, and it will keep a little longer. If this found you somewhere good, or even somewhere difficult, the kind of night where you needed something that understood that the world can be beautiful and terrible at the same time, please like the video. It helps more than almost anything else you could do for the channel. And if you want more of this kind of thing, slow, thorough, late night explorations of the shows and stories that earned the time, subscribe. There's always more worth digging into. We go deep here. That's what we do. Let me take you back to the Ice King for a moment, not to his origin story, which we have already covered in considerable depth, but to the specific way the show used him across the seasons before the full revelation, and to the fan theories that emerged during that period when the fandom could sense something was wrong about the character without yet being able to name what it was. The Ice King appears from the very first episode of Adventure Time as the main antagonist of the show's early seasons. He kidnapped princesses. He bothered Finn and Jake. He was presented as a villain, and a fairly incompetent one, prone to crying about his loneliness and making poor decisions, and generally being more pitiable than threatening. The show played him as comic relief, with a crown and an ice palace, and an inexplicable obsession with marrying a princess. But there were fans, from quite early in the show's run, who found the comedy insufficient as a complete explanation for the Ice King. Not because there was anything obviously wrong with how the show presented him. The comedy worked, the pitiable qualities were present and genuine, but because the specific kind of loneliness the Ice King expressed didn't feel like the loneliness of a cartoon villain. It felt like the loneliness of someone who used to be somewhere else and couldn't get back there. There is a difference between a character who has never had what they want and a character who once had something and lost it, and the Ice King's longing had the texture of the second kind, even before the show told you why. The theories that circulated before Holly Jolly Secrets ranged from the simple to the elaborate. Some fans proposed that the Ice King had been a wizard who lost his memory through some magical mishap. Others suggested his obsession with princesses was connected to a specific princess he once knew and could no longer remember. The Adventure Time Conspiracies blog documented multiple versions of the theory, all of them circling around the same basic intuition. The Ice King was haunted, and whatever he was haunted by had happened to him rather than having always been true of him. What none of the theories predicted, because it was more specific and more devastating than anything a theory was likely to generate on its own, was that the person he was haunted by was real, was still alive, and was one of the main characters of the show. That Marceline was the missing piece of the Ice King's history, that she had been right there in episodes he appeared in, knowing everything about what he had been and watching him be something else, and that the show had placed this in front of the audience from the very beginning without announcing it. The reveal worked as well as it did, precisely because the theories had prepared viewers for something, but not for that specific thing. The fandom had built a context of attention and expectation around the Ice King that the Holly Jolly Secrets episodes could then inhabit and exceed. Good fan theories function this way, not by predicting the answer, but by priming the audience to feel the full weight of the answer when it arrives. The theory about what Fern represents, the grass being who emerges from the merger of Finn's grass sword and the Finn sword, is one of the show's most philosophically interesting and least discussed pieces of character work, and the fan community's engagement with it illuminated something important about what Adventure Time was willing to ask its audience to hold. Fern is Finn's double. He is made from Finn's own matter. The grass sword that had been growing around Finn's arm for multiple episodes, and the Finn sword, which is a blade created from a collapsed alternate timeline containing a version of Finn who never got out. He looks like Finn. He has Finn's memories, at least through the point when the original Finn lost his grass arm. He has Finn's skills and Finn's fundamental orientation toward heroism, and yet he is not Finn. He is something new, built from Finn's components, trying to be Finn while not being Finn, and the show treats this as a source of genuine suffering rather than a convenient plot device. Fern spends his arc trying to be Finn in contexts where Finn is already present, which means he can never fully succeed. He is always the copy in a world that already has an original. The show doesn't make this easy or comfortable. It follows the logic of Fern's situation to its painful end, and Fern's final resolution involves accepting his own specific existence rather than continuing to measure it against Finn's. The fan theory around Fern, and this one is well supported by the text, is that he is the show's most direct engagement with a question the whole series is always circling. What do you do when your identity is built from something that was someone else's first? Finn is the blue comet, a cosmic force that has been incarnating into different beings across different eras. His decency is not purely his own. It is something he is the current expression of, something that preceded him and that will presumably continue in some form after him. In that sense, All of Finn's heroism is, like Fern's existence, built from matter that was something else before it was his. The show's answer, across Finn's arc and Fern's, is that origin does not determine meaning. Fern is not less real than Finn because he is built from Finn's components. Finn is not less heroic because his heroism is part of a cosmic pattern that predates him. What matters is what you do with what you are, not where what you are originally came from. This is not a comfortable or simple answer. Adventure Time was rarely interested in simple answers. There is a theory about Peppermint Butler that never got confirmed, but which the fandom has maintained with remarkable persistence, and it deserves examination because it illuminates how the show uses background characters to build a world that extends beyond what the foreground narrative covers. What the show confirms about Peppermint Butler: he is Princess Bubblegum's loyal personal butler, small and sweet, and courteous in his public presentation. He is also a practitioner of dark magic with connections to the land of the dead that go well beyond anything a candy butler should reasonably possess. He once offered Finn and Jake his services in exchange for their flesh if they failed to return from a mission. He is friends with death in a way the show treats as an established relationship rather than a surprising revelation. Whatever Princess Bubblegum built the Candy Kingdom to be, Peppermint Butler is the element of it that reminds you the kingdom has a shadow. The fan theory holds that Peppermint Butler is not simply a quirky character with unexpected dark knowledge, but a figure who serves a specific structural function in the kingdom. Something like the kingdom's shadow steward, the person who handles the things that Princess Bubblegum cannot handle publicly or does not want to handle in ways that would reveal the full extent of what maintaining her kingdom has historically required. The dark rooms the show references, but never fully explores, the skeletons cuffed to walls in hidden chambers briefly visible in episodes that had nothing to do with Bubblegum's darker tendencies. Peppermint Butler is connected to all of this. The Distant Lands Special Wizard City follows Peppermint Butler at a new school for wizards and is the most comedic of the four specials, which is the show's characteristic approach to characters whose darkness it wants to acknowledge without making the entire story about that darkness. It confirms that Peppermint Butler has extraordinary magical knowledge and an unusual relationship with death and morality, without providing a complete explanation of where those things came from or what function they served during the centuries of his service in the Candy Kingdom. The theory remains unconfirmed, but the evidence that Peppermint Butler is not simply what he appears to be has been present from early in the show's run, and the Wizard City special validated the intuition without answering the question the intuition was pointing toward. One last theory, and this one is purely about the act of watching Adventure Time rather than about its content, about what it means to have followed a show like this from the beginning, through all the seasons, through the reveals and the confirmations, and the theories that turned out to be right, and the theories that turned out to be wrong. The show was made for children, technically, in the sense that it aired on a network aimed at children, and it starred characters who were children or child adjacent. But the fandom that built the most serious engagement with it, the wikis and the theory blogs and the careful rewatch analyses and the years of documented speculation was not primarily children. It was people who started watching as children or young teenagers and grew up alongside the show who were in their 20s and 30s by the time the series ended, who had spent a formative portion of their lives inside a world that kept getting deeper the longer they looked. This is not unique to Adventure Time, but Adventure Time did it in a specific way that deserves acknowledgement. It built a world that rewarded the kind of attention that children can provide, the complete, uncynical, total immersion that adults have mostly lost, and it also rewarded the kind of attention that adults can provide. The patience to trace connections across seasons, the capacity to hold multiple registers simultaneously, the recognition of the real things the show was talking about under its fictional surface. The theory the fandom has been building, without necessarily naming it as such, for 15 years is simply this: Adventure Time was made honestly. It was made by people who cared about the things they were saying and who trusted the people watching to care too. The mythology and the lore and the confirmed theories and the unconfirmed ones are all artifacts of that trust. The show left things for you to find, and people found them, and the finding was the point all along. The land of Oo will keep. The ruins are still there in the background if you know where to look. The candy is still real, and the theories, the ones confirmed, the ones demolished, the ones still waiting in the middle of the road, will keep being worth thinking about for as long as people keep caring about the show, which, given the evidence of the past 15 years, is probably for a very long time. If you made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Thank you for staying with it. Thank you for caring about the same things. Please give this video a like. It is the simplest thing you can do, and it matters more than you might think. Subscribe if you want to keep going deep into the shows and stories that earn the attention. We will be here. The adventure continues. There is something specific that happens when you revisit the snail. If you go back and watch the first season of Adventure Time, knowing what the show eventually confirms about the Lich, specifically that while the Lich was imprisoned in amber by the hero Billy, his essence spent the years of that imprisonment inside a snail, you will find the snail. It appears in the background of almost every episode of the first season. It is there, wandering freely through the land of Oo, while Finn and Jake have adventures in the foreground. It appears on ledges, in crowds, in corners of outdoor scenes, never interacting with the plot, never acknowledged by any character, its presence maintained across dozens of episodes as a recurring visual that most casual viewers took as a simple, running background joke. The joke was not simple. The snail was the Lich. The fan community found this and documented it, and the discovery was the kind of discovery that recontextualizes everything it touches. Because if the snail was the Lich the entire time, then the first season of Adventure Time is not simply a set of light adventure stories. It is those light adventure stories with the universe's most dangerous entity wandering through the background of each one. The snail that you can see in dozens of episodes was not incidental. It was the show planting evidence for a revelation it planned to deliver eventually, trusting that some part of the audience would notice and care. The fan theory that emerged from this discovery was not really a theory about the show's plot. The show eventually confirmed the snail straightforwardly, but about the show's method. The snail is one of the earliest and clearest examples of Adventure Time's willingness to hide information in plain sight, to plant things in backgrounds and margins, and jokes that would pay off seasons later, to treat the audience as participants in a puzzle rather than passive recipients of a story. This method is what made the Adventure Time fan community as active and as rigorous as it became. The show rewarded the kind of attention that the fandom was already disposed to give it. Every documented background ruin, every paused frame revealing a license plate or a bent highway sign, every episode revisited with the knowledge of what came after, all of this was the fandom responding to an invitation the show extended from the very beginning. The snail was patient. The show was patient. The fandom eventually caught up. Let me close with the Marceline and Simon reunion because it is the confirmed fact at the end of the show's longest arc, and because no examination of Adventure Time theories is complete without sitting with what the show made of everything it built toward this ending. The series finale confirms that Simon is freed from the crown, that Betty's sacrifice transformed Golb, and in doing so dissolved the crown's magic, returning Simon to himself, old and human and without power, for the first time in roughly 1,000 years. That he and Marceline are in the same physical space for the finale, both of them present for the battle with Golb, both of them surviving it. And then in the Fiona and Cake spin-off, released years later, the show gives you what comes after that reunion. The slow, imperfect, painful work of Simon finding his way back to himself in a world that has moved on enormously from the last time he was fully himself. He is genuinely himself again, which means he has to grieve. He has to grieve Betty. He has to grieve the 1,000 years he lost. He has to grieve the version of himself that existed before the crown and that no longer exists, because the experiences of those 1,000 years are part of him now, even without the crown, and the self that comes out the other side of all that grief is not the same self that went into the ice palace. Marceline is in his life through this, not as a dramatic emotional support figure, not in the way that the show's most sentimental storytelling might have put her. In the mundane, daily way of someone who has been waiting for a long time and is now in the room where the waiting ended. She is there. Simon moves into her and Bubblegum's house. He finds a rhythm. He teaches. He makes food badly and improves. He is in the world in a way he wasn't for 1,000 years. And the show follows this without sentimentality, treating the return to life as the difficult and specific thing it is rather than the triumphant thing it might have been. The fan community had theorized about a Simon Marceline reunion for years. Some theories were hopeful, some were tragic. Almost none of them predicted the specific texture of the actual reunion, quiet and ordinary, and shot through with grief that doesn't prevent joy, the way most genuine reunions actually are when they involve the accumulated weight of very long separations. The show was honest about it. That is the thing the fandom always sensed about Adventure Time, that kept them engaged across all those years of theorizing. The show was going to be honest about whatever it was building toward. It was going to follow the emotional logic of its own mythology to wherever that logic actually led, rather than to wherever it would be easiest or most satisfying to go. It did follow that logic, all the way down to the end, all the way down to a man who spent 1,000 years being someone else, sitting in a house with the person who remembered who he was, learning again how to be himself. That is where the theories were always pointing, even when the fandom didn't know it. That is the place all the evidence was leading. The adventure continues. It always did. Rest well. If this video meant something to you, please like it and please subscribe. There is more where this came from. We go deep, we go slow, and we go all the way down.